I'm going to try something different today. It's a microphone. Unfortunately, I don't have a clip to put this thing on anywhere, but I figured, hey, why not go for better sound quality? So hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China, and today we have a question from our friend Pavi, who asks about fighters who are very famous. For example, Muhammad Ali. Most people recognize his name worldwide as being one of the greatest boxers ever. But if you ask most boxing historians, they'll name a whole bunch of other boxers before Ali as being better boxers. So why is it that Muhammad Ali has all this fame? And the same thing with Mike Tyson, also a great boxer, one of the all-time greats. But why is it that Mike Tyson has so much fame and he's so well known, and not other boxers who actually have better fight records? So I'm going to tell you something that I learned in college. I signed up for this class called songwriting because I had an interest in songwriting. I was a musician, I played guitar, I had a band, and the professor on day one said, songwriting is not just about writing a good song, it's about selling it. Because if you can't sell your song, you can't make a living being a songwriter. Now, there are probably a lot of really great guitarists and songwriters who live out in the Appalachian Mountains that nobody has ever heard of, and they can probably play the best songs you ever heard. But since you never hear them, well, they're not going to make a dime off that music. So the same thing can be said for fighting. Becoming famous is not just about the talent of fighting. My older brother, he liked to say that artists are terrible business people. And he's really fascinated by artists because they're really good at producing art. They're really good at making paintings or sculptures or visual art, or in the case of martial arts, combative art. But they tend to be really bad at selling this stuff. Okay? So, yeah, and that's been something very difficult for me as a martial artist to make the transition to becoming a coach and make the transition to making a living off of this, because essentially I've got to sell my art for money. And that's, it kind of sucks in one way, but you have to find the balance. Now let's look at some professional fighters. Conor McGregor comes to mind because he's an excellent fighter. There's no doubt about that. He's an excellent fighter. But is he the best fighter ever? I would say no, absolutely not. But is he the most famous MMA fighter right now, even though he hasn't had a fight in a very long time? And he may not even make a return to the octagon, who knows? But still, when people think about mixed martial arts right now, they think about Conor McGregor. Why? Well, it's in his nickname. He's notorious. The man has both fame and infamy. Right? He got famous more from his talking than he did from his fighting. I mean, there are lots of guys out there who have done in the cage what Conor McGregor has done. They've beaten other guys in dominant fashion. They've knocked people out quickly. A lot of guys who've won a lot more fights, defended their belt many more times. Lots of other guys who hold belts in multiple divisions. But why is McGregor so famous? Because that's a whole different skill set that he's also practiced and honed and mastered. Muhammad Ali, he took a cue from the wrestler Gorgeous George Wagner. He's often remembered as being the first heel in professional wrestling. See, back in the day, pro wrestling was legit catch-as-catch-can wrestling, and slowly, those worked matches were introduced. And in the 1930s, when television first came out, something happened. It was boring, and people wouldn't buy them. Not very many people owned televisions. There were like 30 people in the United States who owned a TV set, until Gorgeous George Wagner had this epiphany. He saw himself on TV, and he realized something was different about wrestling versus everything else on television. That was the news and a couple of sports: football, baseball, boxing, wrestling. What was different about wrestling? They showed close-ups of faces. You could see the wrestlers' faces close up. You could see their personality. You could hear them talk to the camera. And that was different. You watch football or baseball, the players were just little ants on the field. You got to remember, the screen was only about that big, about 10 inches wide, and it was fuzzy. It was black and white. Not a lot of detail there. So with wrestling, they showed the fighters close up. And Gorgeous George did something nobody had ever done in professional wrestling on television at that point, which was he put on a character. He dyed his hair blonde, he permed it, he curled it, he wore this frilly silk robe and kind of dressed like what they would call a dandy back then. And he spoke with a lisp and put on some what you might consider gay mannerisms today. And back then, that got people riled up. They were like, what? Who is this queer thinking he can wrestle? I want him to lose. Because that was the cultural attitude back then. It would be a whole different situation in America today. But back then, people saw George Wagner and they got mad. They were like, oh, who is this little punk? Somebody needs to go in there and show him who's boss. Somebody needs to beat him. And so people would pay to watch George Wagner lose. Now, he won matches and he lost matches. He wasn't the best wrestler of his time, but, he's the only wrestler of his time that I can name right now. Why? Because we remember him. Because he did something besides just compete in the sport, which was he put on a character. And he talked some smack, and he talked some jive, and he spoke in verse. Does that sound familiar? Muhammad Ali studied George Wagner. He studied the character that he put on, the heel, the guy that people wanted to lose, the guy that people would pay to watch lose a fight, the guy that people would either love or love to hate. And Muhammad Ali made his own character modeled after Gorgeous George Wagner. And so he would speak in verse and rhymes to his opponent, and he would taunt them in certain ways. He'd play it up. He'd be the heel. Okay? Does that sound familiar? In regards to another famous fighter that we were just talking about, Conor McGregor, same thing. Played the heel, and he played it very well. And so people remembered the name. So again, it's not just about being the best fighter. If you want to be remembered, it's about being memorable. Right now here in the People's Republic of China, there are some really good kickboxers that you have probably never heard of and probably never ever will. They have a national Sanda tournament here in China, which is pretty epic. It lasts 16 days. And to win that title, there are like 400 guys competing. You got to fight multiple times each day to become the Sanda Wang, the king of Sanda. And that's pretty epic. But you never heard of these guys. Well, one, they don't play that stuff on television in America or most of these other countries outside of the People's Republic of China. But also, even if they did, you wouldn't care because they're not characters. They're not interesting. They're just guys who go to work and go to sleep and eat their food and go train and go fight and train and fight and train and fight and train and eat and sleep. And, there's nothing besides that going on. And they don't talk smack. They're very respectful, and they bow and they nod, and soft-spoken fellows outside the ring, killers inside, but you'll never hear about them. Because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as the old saying goes. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer. Thanks for watching now. Get out there and train.